Hola amigos, bien o no, y saludos desde Medellín. Y hoy el tema es formas de preguntas. ¿Cómo puede preguntar gente para coger mejor información? Y también si tú estás en una, por ejemplo, una fiesta con nueva gente y necesitas hablar poco con gente que tú no conozco, pero ¿cómo puede avanzar la conversación? Ese es el tema de hoy. So, hello again from Medellin. Topic for today, we'll just give a few brief examples because the actual topic area is potentially quite expansive. But let's imagine that you're like a cocktail party, something like that, or one of those kind of things. You're waiting around, perhaps for at an interview, and you're waiting with a whole group of other candidates, and you need to say something. You have to talk to the person next to you just to pass the time a bit. Nothing necessarily too serious, but you need to break into that silence, ask them something socially, find out a little bit about them, and that's all. How do we do it? How do we do that and look relaxed and cope with whatever answer we get? Because clearly we could get all kinds of answers, so what are we going to do? Well, now there are different ways to approach this depending on who the person is you're talking to. Some people are much more open to conversation. Some people basically invite the conversation for different reasons, either because they dress eccentrically, they're just very loud, voluble type people who like talking and probably will have already asked you a question before you even think of one, and they'll have started talking to you. Things like that. So that makes it a bit easier with those type of people. But if you're with a silent Bob type person who is not speaking, but you do need to make contact, you need to try and ask something. Once you've established who they are, and maybe where they're from, if you can't think of anything interesting to say about the town or the city they're from, in terms of whether you know anything about it, whether it's a long way from where you are at the moment, whether you've been there before, or what the weather is like in that particular city. Ask them something about that if you've heard of the city. If you don't know anything about the city at all, the next thing obviously to go for is, what does that person do? So something like, well, okay Bob, so what do you do? What's your line? What kind of job do you do? What kind of work are you in? Now, depending on the answer, if you're lucky, you could look for a parallel in the sense of, oh, I used to do a similar job, or my sister works in that type of industry as well, or I know a company that does that. Do you know these people? So you can look for a link in some way from an experience of yours to link to it. It could be a very unusual job which you know nothing about, so that invites you to ask a kind of, oh, that's interesting, tell me more, to explain really what that is, because I don't understand that. If it looks like it's something they spend a long while learning to do, like they're a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, you could say, well, that's a lot of studying, right? How long did that take you? You could, of course, just ask why. Why did you choose to do that particular job? Why did you pick that particular career field? That's a very nice open question, because that leads you into all kinds of things about their personal motivation, history, all kinds of anecdotes hopefully should come from that. Of course, the other thing to look at is what they answer at the beginning, because if they have like a very interesting job, or one that's like slightly unusual, but oh wow, you know, like, what do you do? Well, I'm a pilot, or I'm a fireman, or I'm a nurse, or I'm a deep sea diver, something like that. That offers a whole load of questions about, oh wow, that's an interesting job, tell me more about that, where have you been, how did you do that, is the training difficult, all those kind of things. But since we're probably not likely to be stood next to a trainee astronaut or somebody like that, you can ask those kind of questions of, what do we do if we get someone who has a fairly regular but perhaps not so exciting job, like I'm an accountant? Okay, well, yeah, you could draw parallels. Well, funny enough, I have a friend who's an accountant, or my wife's an accountant. You can ask questions about, is it difficult? How long did you study? Why will be a good one. Why did you choose that? What kind of projects are you working on? These kind of things. Is it difficult? Well, maybe not. But you have to prepare for that type of question. What do you do if you get a question, you get like an answer back, which is a job you don't know anything about, isn't particularly exciting in the standard sort of, well, I'm a circus performer or a stunt pilot kind of thing. How do you ask an interesting question about that? So you can either look at trying to relate it to something else you already know about. So, I have a friend of mine who does that kind of thing. He works for this company. Do you know them? No. Something about the why question, a how question, how difficult, how long did you study? Where did you study is another one. That gets you out of asking about the topic, about the subject. You just ask them where, because maybe they study somewhere really interesting that you know about, like, I studied this at Cambridge University. Really? A friend of mine studied there, but he studied medicine. Yeah, that lets you out of talking about the accountancy thing and lets you talk about a different topic. So there are different ways to steer the conversation back in that kind of way. So yeah, accountancy and tax, you can make jokes about your personal finance, how it's a mess, and could you have their card later? Perhaps they can help you. Do they deal with investments? Things like that. Pathologist has got to be, for me, the really tricky one. What do you say with that? I'm a pathologist. Right, okay. So if you're not completely weirded out by the fact that that job is the job it is, you could ask questions about, wow, okay, you're the first pathologist I've ever met, because that's probably true. Is it as glamorous as it looks on CSI? That might seem a flippant comment, but again, you can ask why. Why did you choose that? That's a very interesting job. What motivated you to switch medicine and pick that specialism? Why do you ask that? If you think that's an impolite question, you could go with something like, do you mind if I ask? And then ask your other question. You might be surprised. Some people are quite open at answering quite detailed questions about the mechanics of their job. And you might get a quite interesting answer. But it's as well to prepare, because it's okay if people have got jobs that you understand, or they've studied in places you know about, or they come from a country you've heard of. But if not, what are you going to ask them? I mean, you can ask them about the location you're in, because that's the shared space. Oh, well, what brings you here? Do you know much about this company, the interview we're about to do? Or, do you know Silent Bob in the corner? He's a pathologist. You can bring it back into the room where you are, ask questions about that. That's one way out of it. But it's worth thinking about, because sooner or later, you're going to have that kind of conversation. It's like, I've never heard anything about that. Often, really, if you get stuck, the best way to go is to ask them to explain to you about what it is they do. So, I have to admit, I've never heard of that job. I've never met anyone who's done that job. I don't really know much about it. Could you tell me something about it? It's a fair question. What does that involve? What kind of things do you have to do that? Is it difficult to learn how to do? Would you recommend it as a career? I don't know. That kind of thing. Think about that. Because you might not need to use that kind of question very often, but if you're at one of those kind of events and you're ready to talk about you and what you do, which is fine because you've rehearsed that, it's like, what do you do if this person is that kind of person? It's like, it doesn't have an interesting job or something you know a lot about, but you need to talk to him for that 2 to 3 minutes because it's kind of rude if you don't. How do you break into that if they give you an answer like that? That's nothing to be against pathologists, but you see what I mean. It's like an unusual job that you really like, oh, I hadn't expected someone to say that. Think of one. Think of a job like, oh, that's not a job I'd ever do in a million years, you know. So how do you politely talk to someone when that's the job that they do? Yeah. Tricky, huh? Have a think about that. That's the challenge for today. Déjame saber en los comentarios if you too have met a pathologist on one of these days. And for now, from Medellin, on that ponderous point, we'll say cheerio.